Good evening. Welcome to Township Board of Trustees meeting for Thursday, February 8th. Mr. Massey, would you lead us in the pledge?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's not a comma there, damn it.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the consent agenda.
So move. Support.
Any discussion?
Was that Mr. Kent or Mr. Mansell?
Mr. Mansour.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And now, how about a motion for the approval of the regular agenda?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Support.
There is one addition we made on this agenda, just to make note of it, and that's the item E. The board will consider accept the treasurer's fourth quarter investment report, which Mr. Buzat gave out on Tuesday night, so we added that to the agenda for this evening. If anybody needs a copy, that we probably have a copy. Is that, Mr. Lehman, any other changes since Tuesday's agenda? Ms. Lane?
I received a call from Commissioner Wright's office. He's ill today. He won't be attending, so he will be rescheduled in the near future. And I did, on behalf of the board, call Mr. Daly. Mr. Daly said he was sorry he couldn't make it this evening, but he's looking forward to seeing all of us on February the 22nd.
Thank you, Ms. Lane.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
I don't recall receiving the the treasurer or the investment or treasurer report on Tuesday.
It was that handout.
Was that the investment or just the report?
It was for the fourth quarter.
It was the fourth
I
quarter.
didn't- Thank you.
You need a copy, Mr. Massey?
Yeah, I got a copy of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's been a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, so moving to citizen comments. And we'll start on the left side of my room and work our way back. Mr. Ert, good evening.
Good evening, Ed Ert, 7212 Porter Road. I'm supposed to still give my address? Or was that stricken?
No, we'd like to be consistent, Mr. Ert, and treat everyone the same.
Okay,
Nice haircut, Ed.
pardon?
Nice haircut.
Pardon?
Nice haircut.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I got a deal on that one. Hey, just want to say, when I make my comments to the board, I hope they're constructive and helpful. I'm not asking questions, and especially tonight, I'm not asking you to sway in any different way. I just want to bring up something that caught my eye. On your last January's board meeting on the 23rd, there was basically a consensus for Mr. Laddie to look into rules for dissolving the partnership of the fire department. Then it was postponed due to information of one of our trustees had to present and asked for a task force meeting. So the board did that. The board yielded and waited for that motion to be discussed at a task force meeting pending new information, which the consensus was postponed. To be on the agenda in February the 8th, today. I don't see it on the agenda. That's how that meeting went. So, I don't know why it's not on the agenda. But, I just want to give you my view of this. These types of decisions should be made behind closed doors. And the reason for that is, we're talking about legal issues, we're talking about strategies, we're talking about could-bes and ifs and maybes. So, it should be done behind closed doors back there, not discussed in a public meeting. We have too much discussion over decisions we've already made. The millage has already been settled, it's all done, I don't know why we're still talking about it. Why do we have the task force keep meeting? We're talking about the same issues. The task force should have an agenda. They had an agenda to review this new information and present it this evening. So, with all that said, I think we need to move past all this meeting stuff. I don't even think we need task force meetings anymore unless they have a specific agenda to address, and that's it, and report back to the board. And I like that statement I hear from one of our trustees, slippery slopes, because that's where we're heading when we start reiterating into all this stuff again. Get ourselves in a slippery slope. So, I say move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ert. We always appreciate your comments. With that, we're going to move to the approval of the minutes. And we have 3 meetings that we're looking at, so I'll entertain either individually or as a group.
Make a motion to approve the meeting minutes for January 9th, January 11th, and January 23rd as submitted in the board package.
Okay, motion support. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now we'll approve the items on the consent agenda, which we discussed on Tuesday at our committee of the whole. I'll entertain a motion,
We already had a motion to approve the consent.
the agenda, but, okay, I guess we did approve that, didn't we? So, thank you, Ms. Lane.
You're welcome, anytime.
The future positioning. Board will consider preparations for annual workshop retreat on February 10th from 9:30 to 12. We actually put in your information this evening a packet that has the various subcommittees or task force groups. And in that packet, I know there's a couple of you that will not be able to be there, a couple of us. And if you still want to give input, there's a format there for providing input. So you'll see, for example, the subcommittee on Parks, Recreation, and other affiliated facilities or equipment. We're looking for what our board members' vision would be. So an example would be if you left the community for 10 years and then came back to Grand Blanc Township, what would you like to see with our Parks and Rec? And then what are some of your current concerns, you know, that would influence your vision? Or what are some of the obstacles? And then moving down to opportunities, identify any current opportunities that would contribute towards reaching our vision. So we have that for our various strategic agenda items: Parks and Rec, Fire, Streets and Roads, Tech Village, Business Attractiveness and Assessment, Planning and Zoning, Zip Codes, Attracting Restaurants and Retail, the Appearance and Appeal of Grand Blanc Township, and the Perry House and DPW. So there's one for each of those, so feel free, even if you are going to be here on Saturday, it might help if you look at this and fill it out before Saturday, because basically what we're going to do Saturday morning is go through each of these items and try to consolidate them and basically give some direction to these subcommittees. Anything else, Mr. Lehman, that
I think you
you want
covered
to
it.
cover on that?
Chairman Bennett?
Yes.
Just to be clear, your expectation is that each one of the board members will give input on each of the 11
Right.
different agendas, strategic initiatives or
And
areas.
it will be a, living document. We aren't going to stop on Saturday if somebody wants to add something in the future, but at least this way we get some direction going on these subcommittees so that the members are going down the direction that the board has a vision of. Okay. With that, operational issues, the board will consider a motion to approve Chief Wiles' request to purchase new handguns, rail lights, magazine pouches, and holsters for the sworn officers of the police department for $14,523.25. Funding for this project was initially set aside in the 2017 capital improvement plan and was transferred to the 2018 capital improvement plan.
So moved.
Support.
Okay, is motion and seconded. And from Chief Wiles' report on Tuesday, It's a deal we cannot afford to pass up. So, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item B, the board will consider a motion to approve Chief Wiles' request to purchase one Chevrolet Tahoe Police Pursuit-rated four-wheel drive marked vehicle to be used in the patrol division, as well as the funds to outfit the marked vehicle for a total of $43,492. This cost was budgeted for in capital projects.
So move.
There's a motion, support. Mr. Buzak?
Can we just add that where we're buying the,
Yes.
you know, I think it's
Burglar,
Bergler. If we could just add that,
Burglar Chevrolet.
right. And of course, the other stuff, I don't know if we have a supplier. I think he buys it from a lot of different suppliers, so I don't think you can on the accessories, but at least we have that. We know everything else should be the accessories.
Well, do you allow that amendment?
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Massey?
to amend.
Okay.
Yes.
And whoever seconded it?
I did.
Okay. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item C, the board will review the request for quotes for the purchase of a new monument sign for Township Hall. And I asked that, I'd like to look at changing the logo, and I've started pursuing that, and I'll be involving Mr. Limata and Mr. Mansour in that process to bring some proposed logos back to the board. And I have started down that path.
Question?
Yes.
So, of the three that are up there, there's basically the top group doesn't have any activity in it, no flexible signage. The bottom does. I just wondering if how the board feels about those two, whether we're more inclined to have ability to update it, or kind of how we feel.
Mr.
Mr.
Chief,
Massey?
Mr. Trustee, I casually mentioned that at the last meeting, you may recall, that I said the top three is voided, only the bottom three, and I was referring to that. That's what I meant.
Okay.
And also I suggested at the last meeting that you be on that committee, because it had something to do with a lot of other rezoning things.
So you like the idea of the digital signage, Mr. Massey?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think the superintendent also mentioned to support that is that meetings would be posted on that sign here at the Township Hall, for the residents that are passing by, and we may get more support at the meetings. I think you
Right, that's correct.
spoke on that. Yes.
One of the problems we have is people drive by this building too, that for whatever reason, they don't realize it's the government offices. They see the police department, without any problem, but for some reason, they drive by our offices. And the address doesn't help because we have a Flint address, and they're looking for Grand Blanc Township. So that doesn't help us much either. Do you have any feeling, Mr. Massey, Mr. Mansour, on
I was just
digital or non-digital?
I was just trying to get a pulse from the board about kind of where
Where's
the
your
consensus
pulse on it?
was.
You like the idea of it, or?
I think there's a lot of merit to being able to have some ability to create some signage or some flexible signage if it's done the right way.
All right, anybody else have any item on that? Any feeling one way or the other?
Still thinking about it.
Okay. We'll put your birthday on there.
No, thank
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
I love it.
you. What you have to do is put up Happy Thanksgiving for my birthday. That's how the kids remember it.
Okay.
All right, moving right along. Item D, the board will consider a motion to approve the purchase of advanced capture module through the on-base to continue the previously approved process of document management for $17,000. The work will enable automatic classification and indexing of township files. Funding for this project was included in the 2018 capital improvement plan. And we heard a discussion and presentation on this on Tuesday from Mr. Beller.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Support.
Motion support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item E, the board will consider acceptance of the treasurer's fourth quarter investment report for 2017. Mr. Guzak?
Yes, I did drop that off on Tuesday. I think everybody had a chance to look at it. I don't think Al did, but it's similar to all the other ones, and it's just the fourth quarter report. We just want to get caught up, so.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the report. If we need to.
Mr. Kent, you had a question?
I'll wait till there's support.
Okay.
Support.
Okay.
Mr. Laddie, or through you, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, to Mr. Laddie. When we're accepting this report, we're just accepting that we've received it and read it. We're not
Correct.
agreeing with the content or the verbiage, correct? Okay.
Yes.
So now we are caught up, correct?
Right.
Good job.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, what are we hearing from the community? Anybody, Ms. Lane?
Well, I can officially inform the board that the Grand Lake School proposal for the ballot language was accepted by the county. So we're going to have a May 8th election. I provided you with a packet so that you would see the kind of information that they submitted and what the ballot proposal will be like, so that if someone is asking you what's happening on May 8th, you'll be able to answer the question.
So the actual ballot language is on page, what is that?
It's page 3.
Yeah.
And then on B, there are announcements that have to be made in the paper, and that's a rather succinct explanation of what's happening. But it's for the 18 mills that non-homesteads pay. That includes businesses and people with rental properties. So it's a renewal.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I
Mr.
have a
Massey?
question just for
Sure.
clarity. Who ante ups the money for the election?
Because this is the only thing on the ballot, the schools will be paying for the costs. If we were to put anything on the ballot, we would be waiving the school's cost, and we would pay for it all. And I sent an email to the board as soon as I knew about this. So check your emails.
Yes, I checked it,
Okay.
yes.
Yes,
What
Mr.
we'll do
Massey.
to save money on this is we will be consolidating where we have more than one precinct. So we'll have 8 locations, 8 precincts, and an AV counting board.
Mr. Mansour?
So the first part of this says it's a renewal, but in fact, for the second 10 years, it's actually an increase, right? And also be increased by half a mil.
I think that's a fair assumption.
That's a pretty slick deal.
Yes.
It kind of gets away from the, what was the thing that decreases it over time?
Headley Amendment.
The Headley Amendment. That's a way to kind of thwart that. Interesting.
Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, I just had a question for Mr. Laddie. The Headley Amendment would still apply, right? Mr.
Right, but you get a boost halfway through it to kind of make
Yeah.
up for it.
That's a pretty good way to look at it. I mean, that's
Interesting.
what it says.
And if you want to also notice, you're seeing that this is 2018, and this will not be collected until 2021 through 2030. So they're actually doing it 2 years early. When you start looking at ballot language, there's a lot more to read into them then. So, but this, I hope, educates the board so that they can answer questions.
Well, are they, do you know, Ms. Lane, if they're planning to have one at the August election as well, or no?
No, they're going to have another one in August of 2019, which is a special election, and a third one in May of 2020, which will be a special election.
Okay, but there won't be any
Nothing
when
in
we're looking
August
at-
or November from the school district.
Okay. I haven't heard anything from anyone
Mr.
else
Chair.
yet, but yes.
May I ask the clerk Lane a
Sure.
question? Is this based on the assumption that this is gonna pass? When you said it will be,
If it doesn't pass, Ms. Lane, and
They'll have,
May.
the school will have to decide if it doesn't pass in May. They've been always successful, or I would say 99% of the time they're successful. And so I would anticipate that this would be successful.
when's the deadline for the being on the August ballot? Ms. Lane,
It's already passed.
for August?
August?
Oh, for August? No, I'm sorry, I'm thinking May already. No, August, we still have time.
No, I'm talking
It's
about
in-
if somebody's in May didn't pass, when they would have to,
I sent that email to Mr. Laddie, and I don't recall tonight what the
is
exact
that
date
3 months
is.
before?
Yeah, I
It's
think,
15 days, 15 weeks before the August
I
election.
think that's right.
So they'd have enough time to put it on the ballot again, right? Because normally they do.
Sure, I mean, if they already have the language they're gonna put into it, it's a tight squeeze.
Okay.
Just like it is when you're going to have something in August that doesn't pass, you have just a matter of,
Weeks, right? Mr.
Less.
Massey?
I'd like to make a comment to something Clerk Lane said. As I recall, I could be off on one. The last millage that the school board put on, it failed the first time, as I recall.
The technology bond?
Yes, I think it failed the first time.
I don't
Yes.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one that failed.
Yeah, it failed the first time.
One of them failed, I don't know which one it
Yeah.
was.
They
but-
made a few adjustments into what it was to cover. the
Yes,
second time
absolutely.
around. Yeah. Okay, anything else in the community that you're hearing about? We do have the meeting scheduled for February 22nd, and those letters, I believe, went out today, Mr. Limita, to the residents. and
Correct.
I don't know, were we able to email any to our board, or we will if we haven't already?
Not sure.
Yeah. Well, we'll be emailing you the invite to that, but anybody that would like to join us, we would love to have you on the 22nd. It's going to be in the police conference room. And, what's that?
It's over there.
It's in the police conference room.
At 6 o'clock,
Right,
6 o'clock?
yes.
6 to 8. And then we also have on February 15th, here in this auditorium, the Genesee County chapter of the MTA. And anybody who'd like to make a contribution towards the meal, there's an envelope, I think. Mr. Mansour has it down there.
We just keep going to.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've already given you all, sir.
So those are 2 dates coming up. We want to run through the board reports at this point. Mr. Mansour, anything on Planning Commission or Metro Alliance?
So let me, a couple things. First, with respect to the Planning Commission, we spent a significant amount of time on the, excuse me, on the sign ordinance. So I think we're nearing the point where the next month or so, we're gonna recommend that changes come to the Township Board here. A lot of the change has to do with removing references to temporary signage. And then there's some other tweaks, but that's really the main thrust behind it. So you'll be seeing that. With respect to the Metro Alliance, number of things. First, there's an amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program, again, amendment number 10. There was nothing in that, in the township area that applies. There was a notice of participation in the Transportation Bonanza go-around for 2018, which I forwarded to Mr. Limita to make sure that Mr. Lloyd was involved in that. A couple other things, but there are recycle dates that are being scheduled for 2018. Mother's Day weekend is going to be in Grand Blanc. And then there are going to be 5 or 6 other times over the course of 2018, some of which will be during the week. So they're trying to break up the times so that people who are maybe working weekends have an opportunity to take advantage of the recycle weeks or recycle opportunities. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mansour. Mr. Thomas, anything in Parks and Rec?
Yes, I have a report, but could you skip me
Sure.
And just come back to me, please. Thank you.
Mr. Massey, anything on
No
fire?
report at this time.
Okay, Mr. Kent, anything with police or zoning?
Police hasn't met since our last meeting, zoning board of appeals. We had a unique piece of property over on Center Road, on the west side of Center Road. Kind of a leftover, possibly future phase of a subdivision that never happened. It was never platted or developed. Anyway, there was a request for that to be split by the owner, and that was found very unique anyway, but it was found favorable.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Guzak, anything?
No, nothing else, thank you.
Ms. Lane?
I can give you a short overview on the zip code subcommittee, if you don't mind. We mailed out this week 1,300 letters to people who live or own property in Flint 48507 that is within Grand Blanc Township. A couple weeks ago, I had sent out the letters to all the tenants and property owners of businesses in the Flint 48507, and we're getting a substantial return from the businesses and tenants, so.
Thank you, Ms. Lane. One of the things that been active with on social media is in communicating with residents that have been making complaints is, I don't know if all of you are familiar with the About Town advertising circular that's thrown in your driveway during the week that's in the plastic bag. Not to be confused with the newspaper that comes in your mail that has articles about Grand Blanc Township, but this About Town is in the driveway, and a lot of people complain that it fills with water, gets caught in their snow blower, ruins their snow blower, ends up in the ditch, and just basically becomes a nuisance. So a number of people said they've tried calling to get it discontinued, couldn't get it discontinued. I emailed the paper, and they emailed me back, and because I told them that we have a number of residents who've complained that they can't get this thing stopped. And residents are asking on social media, why can't we ticket them for littering? And actually, Mr. Lemata and Mr. Laddie pointed out a case in Orion Township where actually the board members for the township were sued individually for about $5 million apiece for violating First Amendment rights. So we decided to go the route of asking them nicely to stop, that we allow residents to opt out. So we put online a online form that they could fill out to opt out, and in about a week and a half we collected 660 individuals who gave us their name and address that they wanted to opt out. This past weekend I sent it to MLive, and they were asking, do you have that list? Somebody actually forwarded them a screenshot of the Facebook page that I had put the sign up on, and they were very eager to get the list. But you'll note that some subdivisions last week, the newspaper actually was placed in the newspaper slot instead of in the driveways of homes. So it may seem like something small, but when you multiply it by, 12,000 residents here in the township all getting that newspaper, and a lot of them not wanting it, having the option to opt out, I think will be seen very favorably. We've had a number of meetings with regard to non-motorized trails, and we'll have a few more, but Dennis and our team here are working on grants for those, along with the county helping us, and lots of things that we're looking at in terms of development happening. Lots of questions on snow plowing. The social media, if any of you follow it, you can see that very active with keeping in communication with residents on individuals that helping to educate them on how the responsibility for street maintenance and plowing, what have you. I think we're slowly educating our residents on how that whole scenario plays out. That's all I have. Mr. Thomas?
It was very, very interesting to piggyback on your comment about the road commission meeting on Tuesday afternoon.
believe there was a couple hundred people in attendance, and it was very lively discussions, to say the least. But the Parks and Rec Commission, as I was directed by the board to start looking at the operations and procedures, the legislative branch and the executive branch were looking at the 41-year-old agreement with the city, the township, and the school board. And what we'd like to do is we're going to make a presentation. Everyone is putting input into the through the commission right now. And then when we're done, we'd like to make a presentation to the board and the way we would like to see the procedures and show the board our procedures and our operations.
Our board or their board?
Our board, us.
Okay.
And,
All right.
okay. January 2nd, the city opened up the skating rink, and the Grand Blanc Parks and Recreation, we are in charge of opening, closing, and clearing the rink of any type of snow. And if that's daily, open, close, every single day. And if the city wants to make ice, we're responsible to go out there that day and clear the rink of any type of, even if it doesn't snow, we have to go out there and shovel just to get rid of the ice shavings. Like I said, regardless if it snows or not. An interesting thing is that our salt spreader broke, and these are just a few of the highlights that we went through. The salt spreader broke, so they made the Grand Blanc Township, the Parks and Rec Commission is renting Holy Family's salt spreader at a cost of $300 for the rest of the season. And part of that deal also is that we're storing Holy Family's dump truck in our barn at Bicentennial Park. And that ends my report.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I have a question for clarity.
Mr. Massey?
Trustee Thomas, did you say that there has been no upgrade to the old agreement in 41 years, or no changes? No.
Correct.
Really?
Positively. Not only have we looked at it as a board, but the Parks and Rec Task Force looked at it, and there has not been one change since
70.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Thomas, just to reiterate, the school board members, the city board members, and our township board members, the representation on that Parks Commission are all looking at that agreement.
The whole commission.
And they're going to bring it back to their board and basically hammer out a suggested agreement, or what?
Well, exactly. But on top of that, what we're looking at is this board directed me to have them go through and write down and in writing our operations and our procedures.
Okay.
And so the legislative branch and the executive board of the Grand Blanc Parks and Rec, that's what they're doing.
Okay.
The whole commission is doing the agreement, and we have a date of February 28th is when we're breaking it all down. And so far, every member of the commission is added.
Okay.
So it's moving quickly, so we should have it to you on March, and then you can decide if you want us to present it to this board.
Okay.
And then from there, we'll go to the city. From the city, we'll go to the school board.
All right, and we'll be looking Saturday. We've got a calendar that we've developed of the different commissions that we want to present on the various months coming up. So we'll have Parks and Rec on there. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, I just had a question for Mr. Laddie. I mean, if and that commission is deciding these contracts, our attorney would have to review all that, right, to make sure that everything's...
Well, I think you're talking about proposals or suggested
Right, I just want to make
changes,
sure it
right?
was
So we
strictly
would- yeah, I mean,
proposal,
before any-
because-
We're a 1/3 party to that agreement, and you'd have to participate in that, we'd have to vet it, discuss it and agree on it. So yeah, this is just, I think they're just coming up with initial concepts or ideas of things they might want changed, and you be considering those.
Okay, thank you.
So with respect to the ice rink, the additional maintenance and rest of that, I'm not sure exactly who to ask this to, but was that comprehended in the Parks and Rec budget? Is that something that this township is going to have to fund, or are we obliged to do that? I'm sorry for the 3 questions, but
No, they're good questions. To be honest, I don't know that the agreement's being followed.
I mean, I've read the agreement, and 41 years ago, I don't seem to remember anything in it about a ice rink and the maintenance of an ice rink, and I mean, in my reading of it, I didn't see
Mr.
that.
Thomas,
For clarification,
you might want to move your microphone. I don't know.
try not to.
You don't want to be quoted on anything you say or what?
For clarification, and this was brought up to me, in the agreement, it states that the Grand Blanc City gets to keep all the revenues from their park system.
That's in the agreement?
That's in the agreement. And,
No, it's not in
well,
So
it's
I-
on, it's right here. I've got my agreement because it's
It's in parchment, isn't it?
right.
So,
Well, but the reason why they get to keep all revenue from their pavilion rentals is because the Parks and Rec Commission does not use our employees to supplement any of their parks and their pavilions and such. Did you
So,
follow that in a nutshell?
I followed it in a nutshell, but I didn't hear anything about a maintenance of an ice rink in what you just said, because I don't think an ice rink counts as a pavilion.
So the revenue gets to be kept
yeah.
in
Let's
the
have
city.
Mr. Thomas, Mr. Lemon has the agreement. Let,
Where did my agreement go?
I've got it in my
Why are
hand.
you looking for
So, out of Section 6 in the agreement, it shall be the duty of the Grand Blanc Parks and Recreation Commission to acquire, plan, develop, maintain, operate, and administer public playgrounds, athletic fields, parks, swimming pools, beaches, camps, indoor recreation centers, winter sports areas, and other recreation facilities and activities on any of the properties owned or controlled by the City of Grand Blanc, the Township of Grand Blanc, the Grand Blanc Board of Education, or on other public property under the control of other commissions or boards, and on private property with the consent of the owners and/or public units involved. So when it was put together, it was, you remember what they were trying to accomplish here was to put a commission together that was going to provide parks and, recreational activities across all of the parks for the entire community. And that mission hasn't changed. So even though the agreement is last signed in 1977, that mission hasn't changed, but some of the things have changed. Trustee Thomas pointed out that they no longer take the rental, the pavilion rental monies from the city-owned pavilions and provide that to the Parks and Recreation Commission. Somewhere along the line, apparently it was agreed that they would stop sending the money and they would take care of their own parks. They mow the lawn, they do the maintenance, pick up the garbage, do that kind of thing. That was never updated into the agreement. I don't know that it was ever discussed. It certainly occurred before my time, and I don't know how long that procedure has been in place, but it certainly was never altered in the agreement. The agreement would still reflect that money needs to be sent in. So it's more like a handshake or a side deal, or the commission approved it. Again, and I'd have to read back through it again. It's been a while to see if the commission has the authority to change the rules of the agreement without bringing it back to the township board, or the city or the schools for that matter. If that is the case, I would certainly recommend against it, because it certainly usurps the authority of this board and this body being able to control what types of activities and where the funding is coming from, and that. It clearly needs to be rewritten, but as it stands, they certainly had the authority to do that. But it brings up a good point of contrast, is should they not be taking their pavilion rental? And I'm sure it's not a lot of money, but shouldn't that money be going back into the Parks and Recreation Commission? It would be the same if you guys suddenly decided, with the Parks and Rec Commission and instructed trustee Thomas to let them know that you were gonna be keeping all of the pavilion rentals, you know, from 2018, moving forth and using the money for however you wanted. Same deal, and just say, well, from now on, you guys don't have to maintain the pavilions. We'll have our DPW guys stop out there and change out the garbage bags and sweep the thing.
No, that's a lot of money.
I think it, and it would be a lot more money than what
On
the
our-
city takes in.
Yeah.
But I think it, you know, we're getting away from, and I think this is a big topic of conversation on Saturday, we're getting away from, did we create a commission that was supposed to be delivering parks and recreational programming for the whole community? And we're starting to get pitted kind of us versus them, and I think part of that has to do with the way the agreement was written, and I think it'll be a good conversation on Saturday.
One of the, Mayor,
Yes.
Superintendent Limita, one of the things also in that agreement is that the Grand Blanc Township never pays rent for the building. For any type of rent, it's one of the subsections that we're not supposed to, in that agreement, we don't pay rent for the Grand Blanc Parks and Rec, but we've been paying $18,000 a year since, you know, what, 10 years or so? So that's why I think it's really imperative that the commission itself really delves into this and works, as I was directed by this board, to work on the procedures and operations. And I totally agree that it's either with the pavilion rentals, if they want to give us the pavilion rentals, or put it back into the commission funds, instead of putting it into the Grand Blanc City coffers, that would behoove us to go ahead and shovel the rinks and spend daily time on it, but that's not happening right now.
And just for point of clarification, I did speak with Ms. Edson, Kay Edson, our Parks Director, following our last meeting. And she informed me they do have a operations manual for their operations. And I told her that, you know, we'll make sure she's invited for the next task force meeting that we have. I think, you know, what's important for that commission is to look at that agreement. I like the idea of having them look at it. I'm not sure they need to draft the agreement. I think we probably will make that a legal document, Mr. Laddie, and we probably will be sitting down with maybe the principals of the school and the city to draft that, or at least our legal people from each of those entities. But I would say that commission, if they wanted to come up with bullet points of things that they would like to see covered in that agreement, because I'm not sure, and get their suggestion on how they see it working. For example, pavilion rentals, you know, who gets the revenues from those, from activities? As Mr. Limita stated, we don't want it to become well, that's our money, and that's your money, and this is our activity, and that's your activity. So we're either in this together or we aren't. And we need the commission to figure out, if we're in it together, how they would like to see that agreement worked out.
And
Yes.
you are absolutely correct. But one of the things that the Parks and Rec Task Force, we looked at was looking at the procedures, and unfortunately, you know, I cannot be there this Saturday, so I just want to bring this up briefly, is that I think it's imperative that the commission actually does their due diligence and we go through everything and then present it. Whereas our task force, we need to start moving our task force to more grandiose ideas, like, do we want to have a fishing pond at Bicentennial? Do we want to stock fish? Do we want to have a swimming pool? Bike paths, motorized bike paths, connections. I think that's the way that our task force should be headed, if I'm correct.
You know, I think we are looking at the 10,000-foot view,
Yep.
helicopter view on our task force.
So I don't think we need to be bogged down with the procedures and operations. Let the commission do our job, and then we'll present it to.
Exactly. We
Okay.
don't want to get into daily operations with any of our task forces. It's not about the daily operations, it's about where do we want to be down the road 5 to 10 years, and what do we want it to look like? So,
And that ends my
yeah,
report, sir.
okay, Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, I just had a question again for Mr. Laddie. I know part of that deal, we were gonna be storing Holy Family's dump truck in our building. Is there any liability problems for us on that? Because if something happens, would their insurance cover it? Or are we gonna be liable for it because our building wasn't safe or something caused that thing to burn?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Or it's
because
stolen out of our property or?
well, because it's a motor vehicle, they have probably a comprehensive level
So
of
we don't have to
insurance
worry
on
about
their
it?
vehicle, and so I don't think we have any liability
Oh, good.
issue directly. Yeah, so I don't think it's not something that's worrisome.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Limita, anything that you want to report on this evening?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I'll get the letters out to the board on Pollock Road so they can see what went out to the residents. But over 100 of them went out today with 100 different parcels. A lot of those are connected to Genesis. But one of the things we tried to do in working with Mr. Daly from the Road Commission was really to create an alternative to working this through. And Mr. Daly believes that he can offer some financing, 10 years, no interest, and spread it out. It's going to require a big commitment by Genesis since they have 50% of the frontage, but we've heard a tremendous amount in the last 16, 18 months about Pollock Road, and I've personally fielded, a dozen phone calls. I've talked to the chairman of the board of the Ascension Health Systems, the number of residents, and they're frustrated with Pollock Road. We know Pollock Road's in bad shape, just like we know a lot of other roads are in bad shape in the community. They also got a copy of the article, and I believe Supervisor Bennett sent it out to the board, but it was in the last, or in January's Township Voice magazine about Township's responsibility for roads and where the funding comes from. So we're trying to get that information out there proactively before the meeting so we don't waste, half of the 2 hour allocated for it. I don't want to have a back and forth with the road commission. They have committed to be there. I believe both John Daly and Fred Pavandi will be there to help answer questions. But we're going to try to present it in. If you guys really want to get this fixed, we can create a special assessment district or districts. Here's what it looks like. If Genesis ponies up to 50% or approximately 50%, here's what's left. And if it's spread out at no interest for 10 years, we can break it down to about $500 per month per parcel, or whatever it turns out to be, and we can get it done in the 2018 construction season. I think it's our best.
$500 per month?
$500 per year
You said
for
month.
10 years.
I'm like, oh my God.
And of course, if Genesis doesn't participate or some of those subdivisions
That
drop
could be
out, that would probably be more realistic. But it's a big project, and I think it's hard we understand, but and I'm sure some questions are going to come up about why doesn't the township take their participation, and we have to be very clear that for us it's a trade-off. If you guys wanted to start allocating what the road commission had asked us for, and $400,000 annually for road maintenance dollars, it would come at a trade-off with either, we'd have to take it from somewhere, and our biggest expenditure, 60%, is the police department. We could eliminate dispatch or lay off officers or do something. But right now, we have a trade-off of where that money would come from. And we've certainly got some other priorities like unfunded liabilities that have to be addressed, but then it would, it's gonna end up being a question for the 7 of you to determine how we move forward with that. And again, I think that'll be some good conversation as we move forward. But the Pollock Road meeting will be February 22nd from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Police Department Community Room. And if you guys have any way of being there, I think your support would be appreciated from the residents. We can have a very real conversation.
And appreciated by the superintendent and the supervisor.
That would be very appreciated by the superintendent. Also, on your March meetings, we will come up with, we've been working on the non-motorized trail plan. We are applying with the county planning department for a TAP grant so we can put a non-motorized trail alongside the Dordt Highway through the 2019-2020 construction season. Cheaper to do it. We're applying for over $600,000 to do it. That leaves about $200,000 we would be responsible for. But we're going to simultaneously apply for an MNRTF grant through the Michigan DNR and ask for a bulk of that, which means we would be on the hook for about 25% of the $200,000. And if we can get a $800 and some thousand trail built for that kind of money, I think would be worthy of our consideration. I think it's a good spend and a good ROI on our investment. But I will ask you to update that non-motorized trail plan. The last time was 2006. I think we need to look at it and show the connections, and then the difference now with the Iron Bell Trail coming through. We just want to get a better view of what that looks like maybe over the next 10 years or so. Multi-phased approach.
Superintendent, on that subject, I'm sorry.
Let's let him finish the
Well,
report and then we'll.
just,
Go ahead.
And
can
then the
we
last
use
thing,
millage money on that?
what's that?
Can we use millage money, Parks and Rec millage money on the 25% of the $200,000?
Potentially, the millage language was that it had to be used for the purchase, maintenance, or operation of recreational facilities within the township. So, I mean, a legal question for David, but I believe that would certainly apply, that our match money could come from the millage.
Sorry for interrupting. Thank you.
Yep. And lastly, you probably know that the former fire chief, who was terminated back in 2016, I believe, had filed a wrongful dismissal lawsuit against us. First, it was a whistleblower suit. We turned it over to Parkland, our liability carrier, who uses McGraw-Morris to defend that. They missed the window for the whistleblower's lawsuit by 2 days, I think. So the judge had granted us a summary disposition for them missing the filing deadlines. The McGraw-Morris law firm allowed them to refile without the whistleblower's claim. I disagreed with them at the time. In fact, they had agreed not to do so, and they agreed with me that it was going to be dead in the water. They overrode my decision and allowed them to refile it in Genesee County. And so we were back on. We went through, did our due diligence, went through depositions. It really showed that, number one, the township had done a good job of having all of our ducks in a row, having our information together that supported our contention that we had handled it appropriately. And I just want to report that on Tuesday of this week, the judge granted a summary disposition and dismissed the lawsuit. It is over and done with, and that liability removed from anything pending from our insurance carrier.
Very nice job on doing that, Mr. Lemina.
I have a
Yes,
question
Mr.
for the
Massey?
Superintendent. Superintendent, do you have a number of how many homes on Pollard Road?
There were approximately 30 homes, not property lots, but 30
Yeah.
homes. And then there were also 24, approximately 24 residential homes off of the Timberline Drive, Timberline Court.
Yes.
That go out north off of Pollock Road. And there were approximately 24 homes on
Lindsay Lane.
Lindsay Lane, which goes off of McQueen. And during a meeting on the Dordt Highway extension, their HOA president said that they were willing to participate in the paving of Pollock Road because it would improve. So many of them use Pollock Road that they were willing to participate. So they also got the invitation letters to come and come to the meeting.
Okay. The reason I asked the question, I know it's not that many homes on Pollard Road.
Right.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Chairman Bennett?
Yes.
If I could, back to Mr. Lemata. The decision of our, I guess it was insurance carrier, to allow him to continue with the suit after the passing of that deadline, did that result in additional cost to the township?
Absolutely. And
So are we reviewing the contracting of this law firm?
they work for Tokyo Marine, HEC, so they really work for our insurance liability carrier. But they have also, I mean, we've got a long relationship with them. They defended us in many lawsuits. They've done a fairly decent job. I think they're a good law firm. But some of these times it's frustrating. There was another one that was recently, in fact, you'd asked a question, and it was like a $17,000 expenditure a month ago. That was another one that I questioned how the law firm spent $17,000 with a plaintiff who failed to show for any of the depositions that were scheduled. And, you know, I know that there's work to do behind the scenes and talk with plaintiff's attorney and work with the court and back and forth, but I wanted to see how the Cervetter lawsuit came out, and now I'm going to ask if we can have a representative from McGraw-Morris come in executive session, and we have the opportunity to have some attorney-client privileged conversations about how that goes moving forward. We don't have a say, and that's not unusual. Every one of the insurance carriers say we have the right to determine how the case is going to be, you know, brought forth, who the law firm's going to be. They make the call on settlements. But when I first got here, I requested to the board to lower the deductible from $25,000 to $10,000 per incidence because they were settling a lot of cases at $25,000. It makes it a lot harder to settle at $10,000. In fact, they were about $3,000 into it, and they offered a $7,000 settlement to the former fire chief, who turned it down. Thank you very much. You know, right up to that $10,000 deductible amount. And I think it helps us control by keeping that deductible at $10,000 and still have reasonable premiums. But some of that is the frustration, and David understands me. I've had the conversation. I'm frustrated because they had agreed in a phone conversation with the lead attorney, had agreed with me that this case was dead in the water, that it wouldn't be. It was such a horrible case that there was no there. The claims were lacking any type of evidence. And so the frustration was when they allowed them to reopen and refile it. Now, their logic behind it was it saved a potential $50,000, you know, liability if he was able to prevail and get it reinstated as a whistleblower's or something. And, you know, I guess you never know what a judge will do when it's a judgment call from an attorney.
And it wasn't, as I recall, it wasn't dismissed on the merits of the claim for the whistleblower portion of it. And I think that McGraw-Morris's theory was that the trade-off of a possible appeal or reconsideration or reinstatement of the whistleblower claim because it wasn't disposed of on a substantive basis might have been a possibility. It would have been maybe nice to see that if they actually did try to rehabilitate their service. They had to do with actually a proof of service meeting the deadline for a whistleblower's claim, and they didn't do it. And they didn't do it for clerical reasons, really. We've always known, and this was the previous township board and Mr. Lehman have always known that this claim didn't have any substantive value from the beginning. But I guess, you know, everyone has the right to be a plaintiff for $150, so they did file it. They did, through an interesting process, kind of make a mistake on the whistleblower claim. I'm disappointed with the way that it went. Mr. Lehman had very direct conversations with this firm. This firm has a good reputation. They've defended us well in the past. But it probably is time to take a look at the lack of maybe consideration of what we want and what they're telling them. The other thing that I was struck by is early on, Mr. Lehman had spent, this is one of his first tasks on the job, and he had to deal with this fire chief situation fairly early on, and it was complicated, and he did an excellent job, and he worked through it paper-wise and process-wise, and so it's particularly galling to have this thing come back. But I think, again, having a discussion with them is well warranted.
Mr. Kent?
Yeah, I would like to just pass an accolade on to Mr. Lehman when we hear the council tell us that the claim lacks substance, diligence by our superintendent in the paperwork, the evaluations, proper termination is the key, right? And Mr. Lehman, thank you for your diligence and the way you handled this.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. The documentation.
That's right.
And the tracking of this all the way through, I think, is why it should have been a slam dunk, and we're disappointed that our...
You know what just popped into my head is we're better than they think we are in terms of our council. Like, they need to have a little more faith in us and be a little more responsive to us.
Right. And that's where a meeting with them may be helpful.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Massey?
some of the things that the superintendent is doing, they are really never talked about in a positive way. No positive light is ever shining on it. You know, this is just one incident that I learned about tonight, that he put a lot of time into coming up with the right verbiage for the lawsuit. So we never give the superintendent much accolades, in my opinion, and we should, most of the members should stop and think about all of the things he do behind the scene to save the township from a lot of expenses.
You're correct. Mr. Limita does a fabulous job. One of the things that, as he has given his report, that, occurred that probably our board isn't aware is that Mr. Limita meets, is it every 2 weeks with our department heads? And has really been working on leadership development amongst our department heads. We've got great people in those roles, and Mr. Limita is working to make them even stronger leaders within their department, and really making a difference. I see the emails that go between department heads and Mr. Limita, and them sharing various leadership articles, and really getting staff members even involved in looking at leadership. And I think you're going to see some things in customer service this year that we've budgeted for, and also working with our building department. I think Mr. Lima didn't mention anything on this yet, but and I'm not going to steal his thunder, but he's working on a program that will help us with developers that come into our area, come into Grand Blanc Township and want to work with us, and helping to make sure that we track them throughout the process and make sure that things are happening in a timely manner. So I think you'll see some exciting things in that regard. But definitely the personnel items that Mr. Limita and our HR specialist work on together are really helping us on the liability side, because in this litigious day and age, how you hire somebody, how you discipline somebody, how you fire them can mean all the difference in the world in terms of liability. And so it really pays to have somebody in that superintendent position like Mr. Limita that documents everything and consults with our attorney whenever there's a question. So you're right, Mr. Massey, and thanks for raising that. Anything else, Mr. Limita?
Thank you.
Mr. Laddie?
No, sir.
Okay. We had stated on Tuesday that we were going to have an executive session, and actually we're going to delay that. Mr. Limita and I want to do a little bit more homework on that issue before we bring it to our board. So, Ms. Lane?
That was my question. I thought you
Okay.
were getting ready to adjourn and.
Nope.
Chairman Bennett, I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Careful driving out there, folks, and we'll hope the snow doesn't get too deep, right?
Looks like it hasn't done much since we've been here, but.
Or maybe we do hope it gets too deep.